The Hart and Sloan Technologies building towered over downtown Seattle, a symbol of modern success, its glass facade reflecting the characteristically overcast northwestern sky. Inside, on the 43rd floor, where the CEO's office was located, Noah Hart sat in a closed conference room, staring intently at a thick folder on the table. The latest internal culture report, his assistant Amelia said softly as she placed it down. Another 8 resignations this month. 5 cited the reason as toxic work environment. Noah said nothing. He gently rubbed the bridge of his nose, his gaze contemplative. He had built this company from scratch over more than 2 decades. From a small garage startup, Hart and Sloan had become a multi-billion-dollar corporation with thousands of employees across North America and Europe. But in recent years, he felt increasingly disconnected from reality. Reports, numbers, strategic meetings. Everything was clean, logical, and fake. "Have them investigate further," Noah said without looking up. "I want the names of every department head mentioned." "Yes, but if they know you're monitoring, that's why I won't monitor," he interrupted. "I'll participate." Amelia frowned. Participate? In what? Noah pushed his chair back, stood up, and said firmly, "I'll pretend to be a candidate. Enter through the lower entrance. No privileges, no titles. I want to see what our company's recruitment process looks like, from the perspective of the underdog." A shocked silence enveloped the room. Amelia was about to object, but seeing the determination in his eyes, she merely sighed. "So, what name will you use?" Noah smiled slightly. George Blake, 52 years old, recently laid off from a small software company after downsizing, looking to start anew at a larger firm." He paused for a moment before continuing. "And if our company's recruitment process can't recognize the true value of a George Blake, then perhaps we have a bigger problem than any report can show." 3 days after the confidential meeting, a middle-aged man appeared at the front desk of Hart and Sloan Technologies. His dark shirt was wrinkled, his tie slightly crooked, and he carried an old, worn-out briefcase. He had nothing with him but a calm gaze, a polite smile, and a name faintly printed in black ink on the interview appointment slip. George Blake. The receptionist looked at him reluctantly. "You're here for the data analyst interview, right?" George nodded. "Yes, I have an appointment with Mr. Daniel Brooks at 9 a.m. Wait over there," she said quickly, fingers tapping across her screen. No smile. George sat down on a cold plastic chair. Young professionals passed by with brisk confidence. A few glanced at him as if spotting an outdated item in a high-tech store. 10 minutes. 15 minutes, 22 minutes. No one called his name. Finally, a young man in a navy suit approached, didn't shake hands, just glanced briefly at the resume and said curtly, "George, right? Follow me." Daniel Brooks, head of the data analytics department, leaned back in his chair and lazily flipped through George's resume. "Where did you work again?" "MTech Systems? Never heard of it." George smiled politely. "A small company specializing in ERP systems for small and medium-sized businesses." Daniel raised an eyebrow, voice tinged with sarcasm. "Guess you're used to old software then." "Here, we use AI-driven metrics and multi-layered cloud architecture. Think you can keep up at your age?" George remained calm. "With training and access to new technologies, I believe I can adapt quickly." Daniel smirked. "This isn't a place to restart your life, George." George stayed silent. No reaction, no defense, just steady eyes unblinking. Across the room, a group of younger candidates huddled together. Whispered laughter. One pointed at George and said, "Think he got lost." Another chuckled, or someone's dad. Look at those shoes, ancient. George remained seated, his gaze drifting to the large glass window behind them, where Seattle lay beneath a light mist. He didn't feel angry. He felt sad. Jessica, a fashionably dressed middle-aged woman, flipped through his resume and asked in a cold tone, "What makes you different from hundreds of other applicants?" George replied gently, "I believe my calm demeanor and observational skills help me make decisions without being influenced by temporary emotions." Jessica blinked, slightly taken aback by the answer. Then she gave a short laugh. "To be honest, your resume isn't impressive. Average college, no post-grad degree, no experience with big-name firms. We don't prioritize people without pedigree. You understand that, don't you?" George nodded. "I understand." But inside, he was noting every word. As George waited for the elevator to leave the building, a young man in a suit smirked upon seeing him enter. He glanced briefly and pressed for a higher floor. "Thought you were maintenance. You kinda don't fit in around here." George said nothing. Just replied softly, "There are things that don't show on the outside." As the doors closed, he exhaled quietly. 3 interview rounds. 3 ways people express prejudice without saying it directly. Not once did anyone ask, "What do you know? What can you do?" They only looked at age, resume, appearance, and alma mater. 12:07 p.m., ground floor cafeteria, Hart and Sloan Technologies. The clinking of silverware echoed lightly. Fast-paced conversations about deadlines, stocks, and project gossip filled the sleek modern cafeteria, where bright white lights shone down on perfectly aligned rows of tables. George Blake, also known as Noah Hart, stood in line for lunch, using a temporary employee card issued by HR, the kind usually reserved for interns. He carried a simple plastic tray, a cold chicken sandwich, a bottle of water, and a slightly bruised apple. Quietly, he searched for an empty table. Nearly every seat was taken by groups of young colleagues gathered in familiar clusters. No one invited him to sit. No one looked at him for more than a second. He didn't have a brightly colored badge, a thin ultrabook, a buzzword-filled vocabulary, or a prestigious Ivy League degree. He sat alone. Lunch dragged on in silence. Each burst of laughter from other tables felt like a small cut into reality. And then, an older, more worn tray slid across the table toward him. "Is this seat taken?" The voice was hoarse but gentle, female. George looked up. A woman in her early 60s, gray hair tied neatly back, wearing a janitor's uniform, looked at him without judgment. On her tray, half a sandwich already bitten into and a cup of weak tea. "Marlene," she introduced herself as she sat down without waiting for a reply. "I clean the third-floor restrooms. Seen you round. You new here?" George nodded. "Yes, just had an interview." Marlene chuckled softly. "Figured they usually leave the ones who don't belong to eat by themselves." George pressed his lips together, surprised by her frankness. "Has that happened to you too?" Marlene didn't answer right away. She slid the other half of her sandwich toward him. "Got 2 grandkids. I shouldn't eat too much anyway." George politely declined, but she left it there. Then, in a quiet, almost whispering tone, she shared, "Last week, a young intern cried in the restroom. They said she wasn't a cultural fit, just because she didn't know the buzzwords. Another kid? Quit after being humiliated by a manager in a meeting." George gripped his water bottle a little tighter. "Did she come back?" he asked. Marlene shook her head. She handed in her resignation after 3 weeks. Silence. "You're the first person I've seen listen to the whole story," she said as she stood up. "Hope you don't get chewed up by this machine." As Marlene walked away, George watched her go. A janitor, someone invisible to most, had just shown him the first genuine act of kindness in the entire building. Not a department head, not a director, but a cleaning lady. And in that moment, something stirred deeply within him. A sharp sense that something at the root of this place was truly rotting. There are things no internal report will ever capture. They hide in the glances no one bothers to notice, and in the words no one bothers to hear. Monday, week 4. The largest conference room in Hart & Sloan headquarters, typically reserved for product launches or investor briefings, was packed to capacity. Over 200 employees from various departments had been summoned to an urgent meeting called directly by upper management. Everyone was curious. The communications director whispered to the head of finance. Administrative staff looked around anxiously. Is this about layoffs? No one knew the reason. No one had a clue, except for one person. Noah Hart, appearing in public for the first time in 3 weeks, after allegedly being away on a confidential assignment, stepped onto the main stage, his expression calm, his eyes holding layers of thought. He wasn't wearing a tailored suit today, just a plain gray shirt, no tie, sleeves rolled up. He looked more like an average employee than the powerful CEO everyone knew. Behind him, a large screen lit up with a single line, "Regarding candidate George Blake." Murmurs swept through the room. Some recognized the name. Others frowned, trying to recall. Then Noah spoke. 3 weeks ago, a man named George Blake applied for a job at this company. None of you knew. George was me. Silence fell across the room like a cold wave, a few gasps. Eyes widened. One HR manager went pale, her mouth slightly agape but unable to form words. Noah continued, his voice steady and composed. I disguised myself as a middle-aged applicant with an unimpressive resume so I could personally experience the environment you've all helped create. I went through 3 rounds of interviews. I heard words no human being should have to hear. I ate lunch alone in the cafeteria, ignored by many of the people sitting in this room. He paused. No one moved. I saw managers tell an older man that he wasn't a fit for a young company. I watched a female executive mock his outdated education, and a team lead says, I don't have time to retrain someone that obsolete. The air grew thick like walls closing in. The only person who treated me with kindness was Marlene, the janitor. Meanwhile, many of you, self-proclaimed leaders, acted as if this company were your private playground. Stillness. I'm not here today to scold anyone. I'm here to cleanse. He turned to the assistant beside him. The list. A slide came up on the screen. 7 names. They included the head of recruitment, 2 regional directors, 3 product team leads, and a vice president of human resources. Noah looked directly at the crowd. Effective today, these 7 individuals will leave the company. Not because I'm angry, but because I refuse to let arrogance and inhumanity continue to poison the culture we've fought to build. Eyes darted everywhere. The named individuals sat frozen, faces pale. Some forced awkward smiles, others looked down in silence. Noah Hart had just torn the mask off, and the winds had begun to shift. After that fateful meeting, a wave of sweeping changes began moving through the halls of Hart & Sloan, quietly but unmistakably. Within 48 hours, the 7 executives packed their things in silence. No farewell messages, no company-wide emails about pursuing new opportunities. They left like gamblers exposed in the final hand. But what truly shook the company wasn't just the firings. It was what followed. Noah didn't stop with those directly involved in how George Blake had been treated. 3 more senior executives were suspended pending internal review. These were people Noah had once trusted, until he saw firsthand how they ignored injustice right in front of them. To stay silent in the face of wrongdoing is its form of violence, Noah wrote in an internal memo sent to all employees. The entire Human Resources Division was put under reassessment. Noah appointed an unconventional interim HR director, Lorraine Sanchez, a former community educator and cultural advisor, not a tech veteran. Lorraine had built ethical and empathy-driven policies for underserved schools. She didn't speak in buzzwords like synergy optimization or next-gen leadership. But she knew how to listen. She knew how to see people. Noah launched a new initiative called the Unseen Workplace, a 10-day anonymous survey that allowed employees to report what they had witnessed or endured, free from fear of retaliation. The results stunned everyone. 36% of employees had felt discriminated against based on age, gender, education, or appearance. 22% said they were punished for speaking up. 11 admitted they had considered quitting solely because they felt the company had lost its soul. Noah read every word, line by line. 2 weeks later, he introduced a new reform initiative. We will no longer evaluate people solely by their resumes, but by their behavior and their impact on those around them. The new measures included: all team leads must complete 30 hours of ethics and empathy training. The company established a second chance fund to support applicants previously rejected for unfair or biased reasons. Peer evaluations would be added to employee reviews, anonymous, candid, and considered in promotions. Not everyone was happy. Some long-tenured managers grumbled that the CEO had become too emotional. A group of department heads submitted a formal request to revise the evaluation process. But elsewhere, in hallways, break rooms, on Slack, young employees smiled quietly. They saw hope. They saw a boss who didn't just talk from above but knelt to listen. Marlene, the janitor, was invited to the 18th floor. Noah greeted her with both hands and sincerely apologized for the things she had witnessed, things no one should have to endure. Then he offered her a formal role, Senior Advisor for Workplace Dignity and Culture. She cried, not from emotion, but because, for the first time, she had been heard. We used to be a company with a strategy. Now I want us to be a company with a soul. Noah Hart. 3 weeks after the pivotal meeting, an unassuming email appeared in the recruitment department's inbox. The subject line read, "List of candidates to be reconsidered by direct order of the CEO." It contained 17 names. Each one had been previously rejected for unofficial reasons. Not a cultural fit, uncompetitive resume, non-prestigious education, or simply too old. But now they were invited back. Not to try again. They were directly accepted into a new initiative, Talent Reintegration Program, with full benefits, a clear path forward, and more importantly, a workplace that would listen. Elias Tran, 23, Vietnamese American, recent graduate of Portland State University. He had been rejected after one interview where a team lead said, "You don't have a strong network, and your school is B-tier." This time, Elias was one of 3 hires into a new product research team focused on developing education-focused software. In just 5 weeks, he proposed an AI feature that helped teachers analyze student feedback more effectively, a breakthrough that the previous team had struggled to solve for 8 months. Karen Morales, a former financial analyst had left the workforce for 5 years to care for her autistic son. When she applied to Hart and Sloan, she was dismissed after 5 minutes with the comment, "You're out of touch with current tech." Upon being invited back, Karen entered nervously. But 3 months later, her colleagues called her the number whisperer for her uncanny ability to detect financial inconsistencies. She was the first to catch a $1.2 million discrepancy in recurring budget reports, and that discovery saved the company from a massive loss. Miles Johnson, 29, lost his ability to speak after a childhood accident. He applied for a UX support role but was rejected because the role requires flexible verbal communication. Noah met Miles during an internal feedback session. Miles spoke using a tablet, where he presented a UX design concept for users with disabilities. Noah said just one thing: "From today, you're leading our accessibility tools team." The entire room rose in applause. No one at the company forgot the look in Marlene's eyes, the woman who once shared half a sandwich with George Blake, now standing as a senior advisor for the company's new Dignity initiative. But Marlene didn't just tell stories. She listened. She created space for the smallest voices to be heard. Every week, she hosted a 30-minute circle called 5 Minutes of Honesty, where any employee, regardless of title, could share something real. No scoring, no backlash, no judgment. And week by week, those quiet truths started changing the leadership. From whispered confessions, a new culture emerged. Employees began recommending talented friends who'd previously been rejected. People who once sat in silence now spoke confidently in team meetings. A new message, handwritten in white chalk, appeared on the bulletin board on the 18th floor. Talent doesn't come from pedigree. It comes from what you dare to do even when no one's watching. Noah Hart stood at the top floor of the glass tower in downtown Seattle. In front of him stretched a horizon painted in the golden hues of sunset. Behind him was the office he once thought himself too busy to ever leave. But after 3 weeks as George Blake, Noah saw it clearly. A CEO isn't just someone who draws up strategy or speaks to shareholders. He's also the one who must descend into the basement to listen to the sighs no one else notices. Late at night, Noah often sat alone in the conference room on the 20th floor, its lights dimmed, the hum of the HVAC the only sound. There, he reopened the notebook he had used during his time as George, each page filled with quotes, glances, and fragments from the interviews. Why are you still applying for jobs at your age? We need someone young and fast, not someone just relearning how to type. Each sentence felt like a blade, cutting deep into the culture he thought he'd built. And Noah understood then. This didn't start with the employees, it started with him. The next morning, Noah summoned the entire senior executive team, but not to reflect or review metrics. He wanted them to hear what they had never dared to listen to. He invited Elias, Karen, Miles, and Marlene to speak at the leadership meeting. No slides, no KPIs, no budget projections, just the truth. When Miles used his tablet to deliver a message in a computerized voice, "Some of us are quiet not because we know less, but because we've never been asked," the room fell utterly silent. It was as if no one had ever heard such honesty before. 1 week later, Noah officially introduced a new framework: the 5 commitments for leadership at Hart and Sloan, 1 blind interviews. All initial applications must be anonymized. No names, no schools, no photos. Second, monthly listening hours. Every manager must dedicate 1 hour per month to hear feedback directly from their team, with a third-party recorder present. 3. Unfiltered access. Any employee can write directly to the CEO without filters or approvals. 4th, promotion by contribution, not credentials. Career advancement will be based on impact, not university names. 5th Annual Ground Level Immersion. Every executive must spend 48 hours per year working in frontline roles. One afternoon, Noah returned to his desk to find an envelope. No name, no logo. Inside was a note, handwritten in careful blue ink. I used to think I was invisible, but when you sat beside me in the cafeteria and called me colleague, I began to believe in something bigger. Thank you for seeing me, before I saw myself. No signature. But Noah knew it was Marlene. 3 months later, Hart & Sloan was honored by the National Labor Equity Association for its Reimagining Workplace Dignity initiative. When asked about the award, Noah simply said, "You can't fix what's broken from above." Sometimes you have to become part of the forgotten to truly understand the pain they carry. He had descended, and from the darkest place, he had lit a light that many offices forget: humanity.